Hey Josh, how are you? Welcome.
Oh, I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Super. Super excited to have you today. And the topic, as super hot topics these days, it's about sugar. So let's set the context for our listeners. What is the sugar diet? And then we'll get into the details.
Sure. So, it seems like the most straightforward way that anyone approaching this sugar diet thing is doing is it's a pure sugar carb diet, right? So the bulk of your calories are going to be coming from fruit juice, potentially, straight sugars like white sugar, maple syrup, honey. Um, and that's kind of, I mean, some people are like candy, but that's basically the gist of the sugar period of this diet. And it's very important that you restrict protein, that you restrict fat, and it seems like that you restrict starch as well. So in many ways, it's pure sugary foods. And in many of these implementations, it's of a cyclical nature. So you might have a more what we might consider a more traditional dinner of meat and vegetables. Um, but it's funny how depending on who's talking about it and who's implementing it, all of that stuff is the variable that can be changed and the thing that's really consistent. And it's why you've seen this sugar fasting thing almost take over it on, especially on YouTube. It's it's just this like pure fruit sugar diet. In a sense, it's kind of like fruitarianism. That is not forever, right? It's punctuated by the inclusion of other foods.
Is the sugar diet coming from, Ray Peat audience? Maybe you can type in the notes and tell me where you think this has come from and if it's influenced by Ray Peat and who is Ray Peat, if it's relevant.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing right now is a convergence of a lot of different camps of people with their own kind of unique interest in nutrition. At least from my side, this very much came from Ray Peat. I've been learning about, I mean, I first heard about Ray Peat over a decade ago, but it was in the context of him kind of being crazy. And I was in a paleo Facebook group and someone had mentioned him and they kind of just dismissed him off. And so I really got more into Ray in 2021. And, from him, in many ways, it's kind of similar to what many of us would have just called like a normal paleo diet in the sense that you're excluding all these highly processed foods, these junk foods. There was an emphasis on the types of fats you were using. And, but it wasn't so much from this ancestral perspective. It's more from this is there's a sort of function, there's a desire, there's a goal to achieve what the diet was, which is increasing the metabolic rate. And sugar is supposed to be very good for that. And so in many ways, it's very similar to what a lot of people call a paleo or primal diet with just the inclusion of lots of sugar. And that you can not only can you eat high carb, but it's probably in your best interest too. And so I've been playing around with this for years, but my experimentation with nutrition has been, since I was in high school trying to gain weight for football. And I found I first found paleo back in like 2011 when I was doing CrossFit. And
Mhm.
you find very quickly that your performance doesn't doesn't go well without carbohydrates. And so I had actually gotten to what I would kind of consider a very high carb diet back in 2019, which was, 500 plus grams of carbs a day within the context of an otherwise full, varied diet, which included meat and starch and veggies and fruit and dairy. Um, and so I had enough experience with high carb before I got to Ray Peat. And when it came to, a lot of things, there's because I kind of exist on this sort of world in Twitter, and that's where a lot of my Ray Peat kind of community comes from. And I think a lot of how anyone approaches any of these kind of diet cults that we might call them is really predicated on the people that they connect with through the diet. And you kind of learn from the people just as much, if not more, than you learn from the source material. And one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of people find Ray Peat once they've tried everything else. It's kind of like this, I'm kind of on my last legs here. I really need an answer that these more simple solutions aren't going to get. Because, if you're already healthy and you have all your results and you just want to lose a little bit of weight and you cut your calories a little bit and you lose weight, you're just like, great, that's fine, that's easy, I don't have any problems. And then you have people who go for the more, I don't know if I want to call them fad type diets, but the diets that kind of have a whole philosophy behind them and exclusion of foods and inclusion of other foods. And so you have veganism and paleo and keto, and people, they get their good results and they're like, great, I'm fine. And usually what happens is those results only last for so long, or they just never can quite get them and they're just like, I really need something else. And so for me, I had been exposed, and I tried carnivore in 2020. And for me, the kind of reason to get into a more restrictive diet like that was I just felt like my digestion wasn't where it needed to be. And I
Mhm.
had this discomfort with bloating. And, it just felt like this shouldn't be a problem. I feel like I need to solve this problem. And so I tried carnivore, and it worked really, really well for a short period of time. And then all of a sudden, my body became very aware that it needed carbohydrate. And so I started adding in raw milk and honey to an otherwise mostly carnivorous diet. And I started reading about both Ray Peat and Augenis Vonderplanitz, who, if you're familiar with him, he created this raw primal diet, which is in many ways a very similar diet, but all the meat is raw, the milk is raw, the eggs are raw, all that. And it kind of seemed like I was at a fork in the road. Do I want to go down the peat path or do I want to go down the primal path? And I've always kind of always defaulted towards this naturalistic kind of approach and things. And so this, oh, well, every animal eats all their meat raw. So maybe if we kind of do this very primal, ancestral kind of caveman thing, that's the answer. Well, that didn't really work well. It actually worked terribly after a while. I gained a lot of weight and I got very sick after a period of time. And so it was basically like I ended up in the hospital, and that's when I was like, okay, Ray Peat saved me now. Um, and one thing that you'll find a lot of people report is they start to feel a lot better when they start implementing these Ray Peat protocols, and learning about different foods that you should include. And people tend to gain a lot of weight because if all of a sudden you've been coming from, which most of us have, a kind of not necessarily keto, but and not even necessarily low carb, but that fat is good. And then all of a sudden you get told that sugar is really good for you and you want to eat a lot of carbs. Well, pretty much you kind of find yourself in not just a metabolic swamp, but a lot of all of these foods. And you start eating a lot of ice cream, and you kind of just start eating everything. And so for me, at a certain point, I was like, I need to lose weight. And also, I don't feel as good as I should if the idea is these foods that have all these various nutrients in them, I'm getting a very nutrient dense diet. What's going on here? And I had started doing just like a more traditional cut, but it was just like, I'm just going to cut all the fat out of my diet. This was like 2 years ago. And I dropped like 25 pounds. My diet was like non-fat Greek yogurt, dates, some cereal, shrimp, and rice. And I would just eat tons of that. I would put a full cup of sugar into my coffee every day. I would drink orange juice, and the weight came right off. But then I started to notice that I wasn't feeling very good after a while, and I thought it was from the low fat idea. Um, and then this comes, I'm kind of like, ranting in a sense, but for me, at least, I feel like the kind of the picture kind of just explains how I got here. Because losing weight is actually very easy. Losing weight is one of the easiest things in the world to do. Just don't eat, you will lose weight. But the question becomes like, how do you feel good? How do you not just adhere to the diet, but want to adhere to the diet and be, a high functioning person? And at first I thought that, okay, It seems that my cholesterol, I probably dropped my cholesterol a little bit too low from cutting out a lot of fat, and maybe my vitamin A is now very too low because I've cut out all these foods. But it wasn't until Anabology, who I'm friends with on Twitter, started talking about the honey diet that I kind of started to think about, okay, wait a second. What have I done in the past that works? And why is this really resonating with me? And for me, one of the things that I often did was I chose my food selection during the day based on how I thought it would kind of get me going through the day. So having like a big plate of bacon and eggs in the morning for me was never really something that made me feel good because then I wouldn't want to go and be active during the day. I wouldn't want to go hit my workout. I would sort of feel more sluggish and slowed down. And so, when I talked about I did this very high carb diet in 2019, that was otherwise mostly a what I might call a paleo-ish bodybuilding diet. It was just focus on food quality and food selection. What I would do is I would just consume carbohydrates mostly during the day with some dairy, foods that digest very easily, Greek yogurt, oatmeal, fruit, juice, acai bowls, things like that. And I would have all this energy and I was very lean and I would train multiple times a day and I would just be able to go, 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 go. And then I'd come home at night and eat, a meal of meat and rice. And I was thinking, okay, I have a family to take care of. I need to get through work. I want my health to be good. For me, the biggest thing was I need something to change my energy levels. I want to lose weight, but it's my energy that really needs to be something that the thing that I want to change more than anything. And so I found that when I consumed just the sugars during the day, that all of a sudden my energy picked up. And that's where the protein restriction thing started to, in my head, go, wait a second, how much of this is the importance of the protein restriction? Where's that coming in here? And this is what kind of where all the Ray Peat stuff is. It's hard to parse through because it's very, very deep. He has a lot of articles, he has his books, he has his podcast. And whenever people want to get into Ray Peat, they're like, give me like the quick rundown. I'm sorry. It's not really, I wish it was that simple, but it's been like years and it's like it's not even him. It's like one of my friends says something in passing. And then I might reference a Ray Peat article, but then I'm going to go look at another study or I'm going to listen to a video that had nothing to do with Ray Peat. And it's these little ideas that help you understand the entire bioenergetic frame. And, and that's where for me, Ray Peat just sells the best. It's, do you want to increase the energy of the system, right? That's why it's the quote unquote bioenergetic approach. And for me, all of a sudden, when I really leaned into this honey diet, sugar diet framework, and even carried it off into multiple days of what we might call the sugar fasting, that I felt my energy just shoot up. And that was the biggest selling point for me. I mean, weight loss is great. Like we want to lose weight. People are definitely holding too much fat. And one of the reasons why I think a lot of people are sluggish is kind of they're sluggish because they're fat because they're sluggish, kind of a
Mhm.
dichotomy here.
Yeah.
Um, but in many ways, I feel like the sugar diet is not necessarily a distillation of Ray's work, but it's kind of like a path right through a lot of the details and the noise. And I have found myself because, Ray talked about how you want to have a high body temperature, right? That is the sign that the body is really functioning well, that it's churning along. And my temperatures are much higher now than they were when I was following a more well-rounded diet and even taking thyroid. Now I get above 99 degrees Fahrenheit every day. And in many ways, yeah, I think that this sugar diet thing is accomplishing what for myself and I think many other people wanted to get from the Ray Peat approach kind of initially.
Perfect. I hope we can unpack a few of the things you said. As a uh, young sports person playing football, you ate a lot, so you probably had a high metabolism. You also said that key is energy, and actually, in keto box, we that's our logo actually that open your box of energy. So metabolism for me and energy are key. So maybe we can uh, discuss for a sec what is metabolism and do we actually want a high, in your opinion, or low metabolism?
Yeah, there's this idea, and again, a lot of this comes back to the philosophy that any individual has when they approach anything. And I think what you see a lot of happen is this kind of like misapplication of uh, an outlook on the way that someone does something, and then they apply it also to this organic system of the body. And so similar to people who get really fixated on a calories in, calories out thing, where they think, oh, it's a one-to-one thing. There's this unit called calorie, and it's all calorie and it's all equal. And just as you can fall into that pitfall, one thing you notice in a lot of these diet approaches is this kind of um, efficiency kind of approach where it's the lowest amount of calories that the body could sustain on is the healthiest because it requires less. It is it is potentially more well, again, it's efficient, so it's like cost effective. I can save money, I can save food, I don't need to eat as much. And if I can keep going, this is good, right? But it very much misses the fact that the injection of more food and more energy then gives you more of an output. And if we think of the human body, the kind of the human being as this organism that is striving to always increase complexity and to do more and to discover new things, you wouldn't really want a body that is trying to conserve itself. So, you have Brian Johnson who's trying to live forever, and he's got his body temperature down to like 94 degrees Fahrenheit, which I mean, which sounds, crazy. And, it comes from this, oh, there's a name for it, but it's basically the idea that you want like the lowest number of heartbeats. You want to slow down. Your body only has so many heartbeats, and so you want to like slow it down. Oh, the rate limiting model, I think is what it is. But when you realize like what is like a very, very healthy version of a human being, it's kind of a small child, right? Their caloric intake is crazy, their heart rate is very high, they heal very quickly, they have tons of energy. I mean, I have a 3-year-old son, and just to watch him jump up and down and roll over things, and it's just like he can just go forever. He never has to worry about how his back feels or his stomach. He just can go, 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 go. And in many ways, what from the kind of more Ray Peat perspective is we're trying to emulate this childlike, forever youth type of thing. Because like living forever, it's like you could live forever at this very old and decrepit type of being, or you could live, perhaps a long time, but not as long as this very bright and youthful and energetic being. I mean, one sounds a lot better than the other. And so, you might think of an analogy as a Ferrari versus like a hybrid car that, has crazy, crazy gas mileage. Well, a high performing vehicle is going to be very, very fuel inefficient. And so it kind of requires this um, abundance. It requires you to actually be rich in a sort. You have to be rich in resources. But you have to be rich in this like biological energy. And the more that the biological system has this abundance of, what we might call like the youth hormones, pregnenolone, progesterone, DHEA, um, the just this overall almost luxury of a human body, then that's when you get kind of this peak expression. You get the most innovative ideas, you get the most incredible art, you get the most wonderful life experiences. I think looking at the metabolism as this kind of thing that we have to protect and conserve in this way is kind of this like it's not living. It's very much this losing scarcity perspective, whereas the bioenergetic model is this very abundant, full of life, full of energy, full of experiences type of approach that I know for myself. I mean, I feel like more of a person,
Mhm.
which is a very, very good feeling as opposed to, you know, um, this kind of uh, not even necessarily decaying, but just this like kind of torporous, hibernating model. Like, if you could live forever as hibernating in a cave, like, is that a life to be lived kind of a thing?
I agree. I agree. And my personal experience was that a few years back, all this in the context of keto, not zero carb, but let's say low keto to low carb. My BMR, my basal metabolic rate, was pretty low, and I noticed that my performance, especially uh, in the gym, exercise performance or muscle growth, etc., was not what I wanted. And since then, I worked for the last 3 years quite a lot. And now my BMR, without putting fat on, but only muscle mass, so 3 kilos of muscle mass from 62 kilos to 65 at the moment. But now my BMR has increased by adding more food, basically, from 1400 calories to 1900 calories. And I do see a lot of difference. But on the other hand, there was just a post from a researcher called Matt, his surname I will not try to pronounce, that he did a talk and said that the calorie restriction in mice extended life, calorie restriction by 65%, so basically nothing, increased the lifespan to by 65%. And this was the best that we can do in terms of longevity. And he said there is no drug that can even reach that. Yeah. So, but the base of metabolism, and we can discuss more about macronutrients. But first of all, increasing your metabolism requires calories, right?
Mhm. Yeah, so it's there's a in the more traditional kind of fitness diet model that is very calories in, calories out. You have this concept of reverse dieting. So if you are someone who tried to lose weight or you had a bodybuilding show and you bring your calories down very low, they've always understood that your metabolism adapts and starts to slow down. And so the reverse diet is just as you slowly brought your calories down, 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 you want to bring them up, 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 up to bring the metabolism back up. And of course, you do it slowly so you don't just put on a bunch of fat. Um, and so there's very much this understanding that part of bringing up the metabolism is through increasing calories. And one of the things that people would always say is, you want the starting place, you want your maintenance calories to be high so that when you diet and from the calorie restriction model, you can bring them down 500, 750, 1,000 calories and still be not like at 1,500 calories a day. So there's always this understanding that you want a higher metabolism to start with for losing weight. The question is, can you lose weight without the at least, whether people want to argue about if you lose weight, it means by definition you're in a calorie deficit. But if you are actually purposely restricting calories and you and your body feel like you're restricting calories, and so, then comes the interesting perspective of what you might see on the keto side and what on the opposite side, if we want to call it a carbo side, which is very high percentage of your caloric intake from fat or carbohydrates with much lower percentages of the other nutrients, especially the other energy macronutrients. So if you're high fat, you got to be low carb. If you're high carb, you have to be low fat. And this is what Denise Minger coined as the swampland with everything in between. And it's very interesting that this idea that you're giving the body this almost an overabundance of energy, specifically energy calories. If we consider protein as its own category of maybe a building or structure, and if you load the body with fat, the body sort of can think that, oh, I'm getting an abundance of calories. I can upregulate my metabolism because I have more than I need, right? You're signaling this abundance. And the same thing with this abundance of carbohydrates. And, we can get into whether or not there's this FGF21 thing specifically for the liver? Is there some other factor involved if the calories don't target the liver? But then you kind of have to ask like why why does it because then there's the Matt Stone thing, which again we were talking about temperature. His book was Eat for Heat, and it was basically if you just eat everything, your metabolism will increase, but yet everyone gets fat while doing this. And so one of the things that we really have to figure out, and I don't know if we have a clear answer of it, is why do you get fat if you eat a lot of everything, but not get fat if you eat a lot of one thing and not a lot of the other things? But I know for myself, I never really did a true keto diet. I ate low carb for some time, and when I was younger, and then I did carnivore for pretty strict for about 6 months. But I was doing the kind of like to just eat ribeyes and ground meat carnivore, and so I wouldn't say I was ever getting more than 70% of my calories from fat in a day.
Hmm.
Um, but one thing I can say for sure, because I've probably never done a diet as extreme in many ways as this sugar diet thing, just because of how much I was. It's very easy to get in sugar calories, right? I mean, I can literally just drink it and my body is taking it in. I can make it very dense with added sugars. The the feeling of the heat that you can get, like the sweating that you'll start to have, and not just that, but the drive of the body to then go do things, that is what really started to get me very, very intrigued with this. Because as someone who had been for, I don't know, about a year or so, really struggling with low levels of energy. I mean, it was the first time in my life I had worked like kind of a more traditional office job, and maybe there's a lot of elements there, but I was felt like I was dragging myself through every day, and it was just very, very hard and very hard to focus, and I was having a very tough time. And when I just started loading the sugar from the first thing right in the morning, all of a sudden it's like I had an overabundance of energy and I had to like go walk in the parking lot. I just like I felt overcome with energy, and it felt very much like instead of this idea that oh, if you eat foods you can justify eating perhaps this way because you're very active and you're burning it off. This kind of flipped everything on its head for me, and it was if you signal the body that you're just saying hey, here's a bunch of energy, and it's almost it's such a purified sense without the conflation of any other nutrients that might inhibit the ability to absorb those that energy, that all of a sudden your body will then it will burn it off itself. It'll almost force you to burn it off. It'll cause you to get up and move around more. It might cause you to start fidgeting more. It might cause you to think more and do more. And that's kind of, I mean, I'm someone who had ADHD as a kid, and you always think it's an abundance of energy, but in many ways it's like kind of that almost delirious, um, you know, uh, flip side of that where you have this energy, but it's very erratic and disjointed and disconnected. And to find that all of a sudden, through flooding my body with energy, I could both do a lot and then also relax. My sleep got better. I started getting back in the gym, which I just struggled to get back into for years after I had gotten sick and kind of gained a bunch of weight from Primal. As someone who spent my whole life living in the gym, all of a sudden I just kind of didn't really have the energy to and didn't really know what I wanted to be doing. And really without anything else besides just this pure sugar diet without, any fat or any protein, I was being driven to do more work. I was driven to move more. I was driven to go to the gym more. My sleep got better. In many ways, it just felt like the sugar itself was um, the spark, was the catalyst for all the things that came after, as opposed to some sort of other be series of behavioral changes and patterns that it fit into. The kind of the sugar in itself and the absence of everything else seemed to have been what drove it the most for me.
Okay. Where does fasting fall into the Ray Peat world? Dr. Panda says that we need to fast for 14 hours, for example. I mean, that's not excessive, I guess. But where do you stand in terms of fasting? Yeah, and maybe if you think that the benefits that might happen for the period we're not eating if they're relevant or not.
Well, I think the because the reason why something like fasting or keto would be considered unhealthy from the Ray Peat's perspective is that it kind of triggers the stress metabolism, right? The body then feels that it is under stress, that it's going to be deprived of food, and so it starts catabolizing itself to come up with energy. And that's, where cortisol kicks up, adrenaline kicks up, you're going to get gluconeogenesis, and it starts, harvesting the body for nutrients and for glucose. But the thing is the body wouldn't have the whole stress metabolism if it wasn't serving a purpose, right? It is this kind of life-saving process that, yeah, if you truly were without food, your body would need to figure something out or it would just die. We're so adaptable, and that's kind of the beauty of being this organic system. And when one of the reasons why cortisol kicks up in times of stress, even when you might not necessarily be fasted, is we can all of a sudden give the body a quick jolt of extra nutrition. If people are familiar with the fight or flight response. If you're being chased by an animal, your body isn't thinking, okay, well, I really need to relax and really need to recover. I have this wound that I need to heal. It's like, no, I mean, we're about to die right now, and everything else can wait. So we're putting an emergency that is going to jump at the top of the priority system of the body. And that means let's stop all healing, let's stop all recovering, and let's start actually breaking down the body and flooding the body with glucose so that we can use whatever last ditch effort we have to get away from some animal that's chasing us. The problem becomes when this is chronically elevated, right? It's this acute versus chronic stress response. And so what I think the biggest issue is that people do a lot of these things every day. They're an intermittent faster and they fast for 16 hours every single day. Or they do, the warrior diet. So it's just one meal a day every day. Or they do regular 3-day fasts, maybe once a quarter or something like that. I think when you just give the body the signal day in and day out over time, that's when it becomes much more detrimental. I'm certainly open to the idea that an occasional fast could serve a benefit. Um, but I guess the question would be, what is it about the fast that is giving us this therapeutic effect? And can we get some of, if not most of, or all of that effect without the associated downsides? So, I read Martin Berkin's blog back in 2010, Lean Gains, and I was doing intermittent fasting. And again, one of the reasons for me, and this has kind of been a driver for a lot of my nutrition experimentation, has been alleviation of the digestive system. It was feeling that I was bloated and this was uncomfortable. And so I've tried a lot of things specifically to avoid bloating. And so, I have experience with some of these things. But one of the reason why we're told that fasting is good is that you get a autophagy, or specifically that you're getting into ketosis. And so one of the things that people would do was kind of like the Dave Asprey bulletproof thing was, if you just consume fat, you're getting all the benefits of fasting without any of the downsides. You're still getting calories in. And so the benefits of fasting are protein restriction and carbohydrate restriction. So already there you have an approach that was designed to um, replicate fasting or mimic it. And many people, especially if your followers are followers of keto, they will know that keto has been described as a fasting mimicking diet, right? It sort of gives people the same results. And this was especially done with people with epilepsy, for seizures, especially for kids who it'd be very hard to get them to adhere to a strict fasting protocol. If you can give them a ketogenic diet, they might still get the same effect. So this isn't a new concept. But then the question might be instead, um, what if the benefits of fasting aren't specifically from carbohydrate restriction? maybe it's the protein restriction that's at the core of it. Because they've shown, people always refer to calorie restriction as one of the best things you can do for longevity. But if you do less of everything, you're not really controlling for what aspect you can be doing less of that are giving the biggest benefit.
Yeah.
So I think that the protein restriction it's very interesting and it's something that we should probably be looking more into, both from perhaps from a ketogenic perspective and this more high carb side of things. Perhaps both sides work really well and maybe in different ways. Um, for me, I think it makes much more sense that a diet that is either more diversified or more biased towards carbs makes more sense in general for most of the time. And then certain punctuated periods of fasting might serve a benefit. I'm still sort of, I don't have a kind of definitive answer on that. I know even Ray himself said that a short-term ketogenic diet might be therapeutic, for a few weeks or up to 2 months. Um, because it does seem like I think the body has these bottlenecks in its various metabolic processes that it seems like if you give it a break, sometimes it can alleviate the problem versus just cramming stuff through. And you might see this on both sides of the spectrum. You might see it from a fat side, you might see it on a carb side, where um, people who have been trying the sugar diet thing might feel what some people describe as like the liver punch. If you eat too much sugar, at some point you kind of get this like slight nausea, and your liver just kind of feels like a hit. And so, okay, maybe you've done that thing, and the body would really benefit from a period of absence of sugar to kind of let the liver sort of clear up. And on the other side, you might have been eating high fat for a while, and perhaps your gallbladder or something similar, it's kind of being overburdened with this fat production. The human body is so versatile, and I think we're supposed to be able to thrive in kind of these various extremes, at least in isolated or certain periods of time, not forever.
It's interesting how you manage, uh, let's say, periods of time where you are busy. Because, for example, Anabology has said that he's downing half a pound of honey. Okay, and let's say that you're busy and you have some appointments and you need to drive here and there, etc. Right? So how do you manage the need to eat all the time? Just on a practical level, I mean.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, some of that requires preparation. Um, but one thing I've noticed for sure is, I'm playing still with a lot of with the different types of food intakes, and because I still like, there's still this element of wanting to lose fat, but for me, the main goal is I just want to feel as good as I can every day, and I will gladly feel very good in an effort above trying to maximize the rate of fat loss. So I think when you lean into the fat loss above all else, you kind of start to put yourself in a more tenuous circumstance where then you might find yourself starving and needing food when it might be more difficult to come up with things. But what I found is, um, oddly enough, if I eat a lot of whole fruit, if I try to eat a big whole fruit breakfast, um, I will fill myself up, and I might even feel uncomfortably full. And then about an hour and a half later, I just get hit with this really incredible hard hunger that is, almost overwhelming in a sense, and it feels like I'm starving. Um, and so I think it really comes down to like the combination of foods. And so I have found that giving the body, oddly enough, a more direct source of sugar in the form of juice seems to be something that actually sustains me for longer because I can consume more of it. And so I'm giving my body a higher source of just dense carbohydrates and sugar as energy. And so it's much, much more calories than if I ate a giant full salad bowl filled with fruit and it was, 3, 4 pounds of fruit. I would just almost be sick at a certain point. I would feel so uncomfortable and I wouldn't be able to consume nearly as many calories as I would if I drank juice. But and then you have the on the opposite of the fruit side, if it's like pure sugar, that's going to go through you and then you're going to be starving right away. I mean, I did about 6 months ago, I did a Coke diet, which was I was mostly just drinking Coca-Cola all day long. And I wanted to see what would happen. And my weight loss was incredible fast, but basically I had to be drinking a Coke at all times or my blood sugar would just drop and I would crash. And for me, I mean, you can bring dried fruit with you. That's a very easy thing. That's shelf stable. You can keep it in your pocket. You can keep it in, I carry a fanny pack with me. I mean, I know people are doing candy. I've done some of it. I feel like it's nice as a little snack in a pinch, but it doesn't really make you feel good. And for me, again, feeling good is the really important thing. But juice seems to be consistently for me the best calorie source because it very much, like I said, it's a dense enough source of the of the actual sugar, the energy that's coming in the body. But there is still, I mean, if I'm drinking orange juice, which has pulp, that's going to have a little bit more fiber to it versus maybe like an apple juice or something like that. And actually, I posted a YouTube video about my experience with orange juice versus apple juice. And I really, really like orange juice as kind of like my daily meal, so to speak, because I feel like it holds much longer. And you kind of have to put yourself in a situation where you can, um, depending on what you have to do during the day, you can kind of prepare as well as possible by, for me, it's been consuming a lot of orange juice while also having, I might make sure that I have like a little bag of dried fruit or perhaps even some candy, some gummy bears as sort of like an emergency if I can't get more fruit or more juice during the day. But I mean, I kind of set my day up such that, I either bring something with me. If I'm at home, I of course have food. If I'm at the office, there's a fridge. Or if I'm driving around, I might be able to just stop in somewhere and grab another juice. Or at the very least, an emergency, go through a drive-through and get a lemonade or a soda or something like that. But I think you can do this in a fully, if your focus was on purely what we might consider natural whole foods, and I don't want to drink any soda, I don't want to eat any candy. Dried fruit's probably the safest bet because, it'll be stable and you can bring it with you. But for me, I have just tried my best to have juice available as much as possible. And then fruit is almost this kind of added side of things, mostly for either just mouth texture and feel, and maybe a little bit of fiber to keep things moving along digestively. But I've definitely been biasing towards fruit, juice over whole fruit, and I seem to feel best when I do that.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. I think that's a topic of still discussion between keto or low carb and high carb, because I think most of the low carb people would argue that they prefer 2 meals a day than eating, snacking, or whatever you define it all day. Our friend, ex-Fatalos, asked me to ask you, for whom would he expect or you expect the sugar diet not to work? For example, he said people like him.
Yeah, what I think we're going to find is because again, like this exact thing that we're doing is somewhat new, but the general idea people have been trying for quite some time. And so, you have what I call the high carb vegans, which is sort of like the Durian Rider school of thought, which, most veganism is kind of similar to a lot of perhaps even the keto or omnivorous approaches, this kind of the minimal required food to survive. Whereas Durian Rider was give yourself an abundance of fruit, abundance of sugar, and abundance of starch. All of a sudden you'll have all this energy, be able to do a lot more things, and the fat will just come off. And so what I think the best example is to look at the people in that who struggle the most. And so the question becomes, are the people who are failing on this, are they adhering to it in the first place. And I've been friends with ex-fat loss online. It's impossible to know what someone's doing, but the way that he approaches things, I kind of think of him as someone who's likely to adhere or at least do what he's saying that he's doing. Um, and then, you find that, especially in his reports of his diets that he's been doing, he'll report anything that he can't adhere to, he has some horrible feeling that he then decides to cut doing it. So, he tried this glass noodle diet, which was just like pure potato starch that had no protein, and it destroyed his digestion. And then he felt, this was the first diet that he said he thought was actually very dangerous, that he thought could be very harmful for people. And it was that kind of sickness in the liver that he was feeling. And so, it's very, the body's obviously very complex because if it was simple, we wouldn't have these problems. We wouldn't have all these people trying to figure out diets to do. Um, and, in many ways, I think almost a more extreme version might be worth trying. If anyone has ever experienced an actual juice cleanse, which is essentially in many ways similar to this sugar diet, sugar fasting thing, but is much lower calorie. If years ago I watched the documentary Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead, and it was just after college, my roommate and I decided to try a juice cleanse. This kind of idea that we had just spent 4 years partying and done a lot of terrible things to our body, and perhaps we need a little bit of a reset or a cleanse. And so, I couldn't tell you what the actual caloric intake was, but it's predominantly green juice. And I can't imagine we were getting more than 1,000 to 1,500 calories on the highest day. And I mean, I dropped 23 pounds in 12 days, which is a very extreme rate of fat loss. But if you watch the video, the documentary, these are people who are like very, very obese, who are losing hundreds of pounds. And I can't imagine that that person who weighed 400 something pounds is metabolically more deranged than ex-fat loss is. So then the question then becomes, is that going to be healthy at all to do? Um, and the thing is, I think if you're that overweight, it's kind of like, and I don't think ex-fat loss is that overweight anymore. At least I don't know how much he was at his highest. But when you get to a certain point, it kind of becomes a life or death thing. And I think just like I don't think anyone should have to be doing this diet. I don't think anyone should have to do keto. I don't think anyone should have to do sugar diet. But in many ways, we're kind of screwed up, right? Like we're metabolically screwed up, whether it's the foods that we've eaten already in our lives, if there's something wrong with the environment, it's the air, the water, the EMFs, God knows what is screwing ourselves up. So we're kind of like in a different, we're not really just trying to um, contain ourselves within like the natural world and what some caveman would have eaten or something like that. We're going to have to open ourselves up to pushing the boundaries with extreme diets, perhaps extreme substances, whether they be natural herbal extracts or they actually be pharmaceuticals. It's kind of you're dealing with these harmful aspects of the modern world, and we might have to do something a little unusual. So if the question becomes, what exactly is it about these people who are very overweight, who can't lose weight on an all carb diet? Your different cells can be insulin resistant or insulin sensitive at the same time. So there's this kind of like systemic resistance versus a more specific resistance in different types of tissue, muscle versus fat. The body seems to be very much I don't know if I want to say damaged if people, have any issue with that, but the body seems to definitely be very injured in such a way that losing fat seems to be just no matter what diet approach they do, very, very, the body just seems to fight it as much as possible. But we already know, we've seen studies where people whose ancestors lived in recent famines, epigenetically, they're going to be more predisposed to being overweight. And at many times, some people just kind of might be really fighting an uphill battle. And I know people don't want to hear that they can't do it, but I think there's the understanding that, hey, you can do this, but it might be really, really hard.
Mm.
And that kind of is then going to require How extreme are you willing to take this? And I think in many ways, as ex-fat loss has found with his heavy cream diet, that's a very extreme thing to do. It's one food in perpetuity. Um, and I think he's found like this kind of nice, like that's like kind of like his safety net. He knows he can always go back to that and he feels good. But if there is some sort of result that he's not getting from that, then he's at some point going to have to very much be willing to try something a little bit more extreme. And from his perspective, because I see his post specifically, and I see the way he talks about diet, and I totally empathize with him, and I agree with him in the sense that a diet that truly works, not a diet that can get the job done, but a diet that just works would work such that you could eat as much as you want, the adherence would be easy, the body would just sort of fall into kind of in a sense like a perfect homeostasis. And I just don't know how much of that is not that it's not possible, that it's going to be easily achievable. It might require some supplementation of certain nutrient. It might require some medication to kind of jumpstart or get through whatever these blockages are. But I would be surprised if, you know, what I have found for myself is that I can lose weight restricting fat. And if I, but I, and I eat, protein and carbs as much as I want. And then at a certain point, my hunger starts to get very, very aggressive for fat. And, I start to want like cheeseburgers constantly. I just crave cheeseburgers. But if I don't eat protein and I eat just sugars and starches, I really don't have any cravings. But my fat loss isn't it happens, but it happens very slowly. And I don't gain weight. I can eat ad libitum, giant bowls of rice, giant bowls of pasta, and I won't gain weight. Um, but then I find if I go into just the sugars, then my weight loss is faster. But then I start to get really strong cravings for starch um, and so I think it's this kind of like there's only your individual diet, your own individual body that can give you the feedback. And so when we were talking about body temperature, for instance, I think if you're following anything and your body temperature is dropping, there's a sign that you're not doing something right. And you yourself have to figure out what brings your body temperature back up. If you find that your weight loss, your body temperature should stay high, your energy should stay high, and then you should be able to figure out how to lose weight. And that's just going to require lots and lots of experimentation. I would be so interested to see if he went to a pure juice diet, how he would feel and how his fat loss would go. I've talked to a lot of people in the Ray Peat community who their digestive system ferments the sugars too much, and even orange juice causes them a lot of gastrointestinal distress. And so again, it's like this food might be the perfect for you to lose weight, but it messes up your digestion. And then all of a sudden you can't do that. And then what are you left with to do?
Just to, let's say, complement what you said, is first of all, digestion, I think, for me is king. So if orange juice works for you, it doesn't mean it works for everyone, and everyone needs to experiment exactly because I think it's fermentation of certain food can be an issue in the gut. So you need to find the right ones. But also what Amber Hearn talks about a lot in the keto space, but the logic still applies, I think, is energy availability. So hunger actually signals a low energy availability, and I think, uh, yeah, we need to eat as much as we want, but also I think we need to listen to those or wait until we get those hunger signals, cravings, which would signal low energy availability, which in that sense we have burn off our fuel, our energy, and then maybe we're burning off fat as well. So ad libitum, I don't think it means just eating for the fun of it, right?
Yeah, I think one of the pitfalls that people fall into is instead of just eating when they're hungry, when they get onto any ad libitum diet, they just eat as much as they physically can. And I think it very much comes kind of probably from a history of deprivation. But it never seems to work that way. It never seems, I talked about this with Mark Bell, where when I was at least kind of trying a more low carb thing way back in the day, and I think a lot of people do when they do keto, and that's why they do these like keto bomb kind of
Mhm.
foods, and people sell these like keto bricks and stuff like that. Is this idea that if you just like overload the body with fat, it'll all of a sudden like flip on this just um, you know, fat burning, fat loss, the weight will just melt off your body. And it just doesn't seem like you can brute force fat loss that way. Um, and it is very interesting because I think in some ways eating certain foods actually triggers fat loss itself. And this is why I think you have to look for all of these signals. And so what you said about the digestion and kind of how you feel in there, that for me is one of the most important things. I find that if I never get bloated, I lose fat at a much faster rate. And maybe you could just be saying, okay, well, you're just eating less to prevent bloat. But if am careful about my food selection, I can feel like I'm getting an abundance of food and still lose weight if I never get this bloating feeling.
Mm.
And anabology has talked about this too, where it seems like the kind of rate of gastric emptying, and this is something that Ray Peat talks a lot about specifically because the the sheer experience of gastrointestinal distress releases stress hormones and it increases your serotonin. And if we know that people taking SSRIs tends to make them balloon in weight, they tend to just blow up and gain weight. I think one of the elements that can actually be causing fat gain or preventing fat loss would be slowed gastric emptying. And the more time that food is in there and it starts to either ferment or release endotoxin or just actually put a physical strain on the intestines, which will also release serotonin, I think that becomes a huge problem of it too. And that's why one of the reasons why I think something like that juice cleanse I did, I literally lost 2 pounds a day for almost 2 weeks. You could say that I was caloric restricting, but you couldn't say that I was calorie restricting 7,000 calories a day. Now, of course, then there's the argument of water loss versus tissue loss, but I very much feel that whatever diet that you do, whether even just to a normal maintenance diet, but especially to lose weight, should try to limit intestinal distress as much as possible. And I think that's where people are going to see a lot of good results. And one of the reasons when I did carnivore, why I felt good on it for a short period of time was because all of a sudden my bloating just disappeared.
Mm.
It was just gone. And it's something that I've really never experienced in that exact way. To just feel like my stomach's just completely empty. Like I can eat and then I just feel empty. And so for me, like again, I want to feel good above all. And I really don't feel good if I have any bloat whatsoever. And I don't think most people do.
No one does,
And
actually.
yeah,
There is
yeah, of
no one
course.
to talk about it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that people complain about all the time. But the thing I think is important to acknowledge is that a lot of people do things to avoid that sensation and it might work and then it doesn't work. And so for carnivore, and this is something that people in the Ray Peat community, if you've ever watched Jay Feldman or Mike Fave, they have great videos where carnivore will alleviate this intestinal distress because it stops giving the gut any fermentable substrate. And then after a period of time, the microbiome changes and it becomes actually worse at processing plant matter. And then even a pure meat diet at that point might no longer provide the same benefit. How sustainable is that? You can cause yourself other problems. But what I have found is I can eat a very high plant matter diet and not bloat, and it just becomes very dependent on what it is that I'm eating. And so when I did the juice cleanse, I was taking an herbal laxative along with it because while you're cleansing and you're supposedly, you're detoxing and you're releasing all of these stored toxins in your fat, you're liberating them into the tissue. You really want to make sure that you don't just recycle them back into your body. So I mean, again, this was like a very specific juice cleanse that I followed from a book. And it included a binder, like some kind of clay-like supplement, and this herbal laxative that just kept everything flowing out of your system. And I mean, my bloating was completely gone during that. But what I noticed was it held for quite a long time after I started including normal foods. And so just like you might say, hey, maybe a true fast is actually something that is therapeutic. And if you give yourself a punctuated amount of stress, that benefit can carry on for a long time. I think again, we can maybe find the best of both worlds. And so a diet that is higher in calories and higher in energy, like fruit juices, maybe more so than the vegetable juices, can perhaps replicate something very much like that. And weirdly enough, for me, I mean, I keep experimenting because I'm just very curious. I think I'm settling on, like I said, kind of a juice-based for the sugar fasting period. Again, I'm not, this is not my life, a juice-based diet. And if I include white rice in there as well, that doesn't seem to cause any bloating problems for me at all. And it also seems to help pull things out of me, perhaps what is left behind from when I eat my more normal dinners. But the bloating is almost like completely subdued. And so I think paying attention to the two biggest things, or maybe perhaps three, because if you want to keep the stress down, you want to keep the metabolism up, you want your body temperature to be high, you want your gastric emptying in the sense of bloating, right? You want to be empty on the inside, and you want your sleep to be good because if your sleep suffers, then your stress hormones will kick up and you'll run into problems. And I think that is going to slow down the results for people. I've noticed that when I don't sleep, my fat loss very much stalls. But when I'm sleeping well, the weight kind of starts to fall off. I think if you can really get those three things, temperature, digestion, and sleep on top of and feeling really good, then perhaps whether it's a keto-like approach or perhaps, maybe a keto carnivore approach or a kind of sugar fasting, high carb approach, I think that's kind of where people are going to see the best results. If for no other reason, at least for myself, I can say that's when I feel the best. Like when I feel the best, everything is just better. Fat loss becomes easier. And, if I feel better than anything else, I mean, what really more could I want from a diet? Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely a person who very much believes in balance, but you can balance by staying at the middle and you can balance by being at the extremes of both. And in many ways, I think this is very individual. I myself seem to do best at the extremes of, I balance myself by going to the extremes of both sides. Um, I think because, as we've seen at least with kind of the metabolic swamp concept, there seems to be a certain metabolic gear that gets triggered only at the extremes and not in the middle, not in the swamp.
Mhm.
And so perhaps instead of following a very balanced diet, someone is struggling would benefit from hitting both ends of the extreme or perhaps fluctuating between them in such a way that they can get the effects of them without going too long and then suffer the consequences. And so, I don't think it's for people who are overweight, like very overweight, like you said 40, 50 kilos to lose plus. You would think that just about anything that they would do would work. And so, I would I would feel totally comfortable having both ends of the spectrum being approached, whether it be from a high fat, maybe keto carnivore approach, or this very high carb, low fat, um, sugar diet type of perspective. The only thing is you always have to keep, like you said, you have to understand the psychology of the person. If this person has struggled their whole life and they finally feel good by removing something, they're going to start almost having this like religious adherence to thinking that whatever they cut out has to be uniquely bad and whatever that they are eating is going to be objectively good. And it's going to be very hard to get them to abandon that once they feel good. So a lot of that comes with, If one of these people is doing it on their own, that's one thing, versus if they're being coached through it, it requires a lot of tact on the coach to kind of frame it to them so that they understand. Um, but I would feel totally comfortable with someone starting with a perhaps a carnivore approach just for ease, and then transitioning into, inclusion of fruit and sugars, and perhaps even then lowering the meat intake. I think that that is a path to get there. Just as similarly, I think that there's a path on the flip side. And another reason why I think I'm more biasing the high carb side is I think someone who eats a very high carb diet that maybe restricts protein and fat can, just like with the way that this honey diet and the sugar diet were constructed in the first place, can include periodic foods that don't fully adhere to the pure sugar approach without any serious ramifications or losing the progress that was made. Versus if someone is doing a ketogenic diet and they splurge on carbs, and all of a sudden their body shoots up in weight from the glycogen and water and perhaps inflammation. I think in many ways, people like to discount water as it's not real weight, but I think excess water in the system is still creating this metabolic effect. I think it's a part of inflammation. It could be stressful on the system. It can make you feel sluggish. And I don't think we can just discount it as like water is water. It doesn't exist. Because you'll notice that anyone who will lose a significant amount of weight, just even like 20 pounds over a period of time, a good amount of that was water, but for some reason that water itself was still stubborn in a way. It was still tied up in some kind of inflammatory something in the system. And that's why I'm just, I'm not exactly sure how well um, the kind of the low carb keto approach is going to work, just because the fact that we don't want it to be perfectly strict. We want it to be something that still retains the metabolic flexibility. And so I think if that approach is taken, it's one of those things where the person needs to really know how they're breaking it up. In the bodybuilding world, cyclical ketogenic diets have been around for decades. Mauro Di Pasquale had the metabolic diet, the anabolic diet, which were these ketogenic diets that had specifically scheduled carb refeeds, because it was always understood that the metabolism will slow down without carbohydrates. Like they kind of already understood this metabolic effect, whether or not they fully understood how the thyroid plays into it. They always knew that the carbs specifically were able to kickstart the metabolism. And
Yeah.
so it might require this more more aware approach to it, where you can do this strategy of a ketogenic diet, but know that you're going to be including carbs. And not only that, but know that when you do them, you kind of have to, perhaps, all these other concerns. You have to keep the fat down. It's, again, I wish that nutrition was easy. And for people like us who kind of like, in many ways, we make it our lives and we play with it all the time, we're trying to understand it. It's like we never quite have the answers, but I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to accumulate a lot of tools. And for instance, like if you can understand like a pure sugar fasting diet is a thing that can work, and you understand that a carnivore or keto approach is something that can work, you can understand that a potato diet works, and perhaps like a milk diet works. These are all very much extreme things, which I just think of as variety of tools. And it really requires awareness of the self, because if you're a coach or you're a doctor and you have a patient or a client coming to you, you're not in their body. You have to get them to tell you to the best of their ability what they feel. And it seems like truly the only person who knows how you feel is yourself.
Mm.
And that's why I always just try to use my own experience, knowing that no one else has my body, but knowing that these are what I think about when I'm trying to evaluate what I should do and what it's working. Um, because I mean, if because I'm still experimenting as well too. It's like I'm still even always trying things that aren't necessarily working. And sometimes it's like, can I just stop experimenting for a while, get a certain thing? And it's like, no, but I'm curious, it's like, I don't know. It's
I,
fun, but
I know what you mean. Sorry to interrupt, but because and now we've been chatting for an hour and a half now, but and we haven't gone into any, should I eat that and should I eat this, etc. Because I think, as you said, just giving a little piece of paper, which is always helpful, like the protocol. Okay, here's the protocol and follow it. Yeah, but everyone is so individual, and I've seen so many cases where just giving the piece of paper, let's say with the nutrition plan or whatever, it just doesn't mean much because everyone has their special environment and inside themselves different things, different requirements. So it's it just yeah, I think setting up the framework first is more important, and giving and understanding the tools, and then once you understand the tools you can bring them to your own specific needs. But I do have a question because this was specific for someone who wanted to ask you what how should they integrate fructose or starch, and what is the difference, and where from your experience have seen difference between fructose and starch. I mean, one higher in fructose, the other one higher in glucose. Um, and there is a debate on Twitter about that, and I think different results as well. What do you feel about that?
so, just like the thing that I'd want to really get across for people to understand is that it's going to be super individual. All of the diet stuff is super individual. Whether you want it to be nature, nurture, what element of it is genetic or epigenetic, but it seems to be very, very individual. And some people genetically are better starch metabolizers. They have on 23andMe, you can get a test that says whether or not you have a higher production of amylase in your saliva. And
Mhm.
so, if you're the kind of person who wants that type of almost like objective feedback, you can get a DNA test and it can tell you whether or not you're more likely to have a higher amylase production, and that might signal to you that you're a person who handles starch much better. Personally, I'm a high amylase producer. I have both copies for the gene, and I seem to do really, really well on starch, specifically white rice. I've tried potato I've tried potato diet for only a couple days because I've not something I really wanted to do for longer. But I found that if I eat a lot of potatoes or I eat a lot of pasta, at a certain point I will kind of feel a little bloated. I can eat unlimited amounts of white rice. I've never found the amount. I mean, last night I had 4 cups dry of white rice. I think I had like 2,500 calories of white rice last night for dinner. Um, and it just like, digested fine. I woke up flat as a board, like no problem. And so I think, what you'll find people is some people do a lot better with fructose. Some people do a lot better with starch. Some people do a lot better with different starches. Some people are like, I can do potatoes, but not white rice. I can do white rice, but not potatoes, and then kind of anything in between. It's just going to require you to experiment.
Mm.
But I think that we can see that if there are people who follow the potato diet, which is a pure starch diet, and they feel great and lose a bunch of weight, that starch is a viable route to amazing sustainable fat loss. Why not? I think that we can see with fruitarians who can be who are very thin, that a pure, I mean, obviously, fruit doesn't just have fructose, it has glucose in it as well, but a high fructose diet works as well too. And so it's going to require experimentation. I think either or both can be a great part of the approach that can get people results. I do kind of like the way that it is framed by the vegans, by like the durian rider and freely the banana girl with like the raw till four thing. Fruit and starch seem to trigger like a different state, a different like physiological state of the body. Um, and I think that starch seems to be better at night. It seems to be more calming and you're probably better to help you go to sleep. Um, and the high fruit intake, the high sugar intake seems to give you a lot more energy. Even Durian Rider says it makes him feel manic, which he likes. He wants to feel manic during the day because that's just kind of where he feels comfortable. I really do think it just requires experimentation, but I think both are totally feasible in a very effective solution. A lot of people say that the removal of starch is important for fat loss, and I think you have to view this in multiple ways. If you are taking the long, sustainable approach, then I think starch is totally fine. I think you can likely lose weight with it. Durian Rider recommends it. A lot of these vegans recommend it right from the beginning. They're just saying do basically a Walter Kempner diet, eat eat fruit, juice, sugar, and rice and starch, and perhaps do it raw till 4, and just do that. And over time, you'll just lose weight, and everything will be incredible. Um, but I do think that if you're kind of approaching this more for like extreme fat loss and you want rapid fat loss, I don't necessarily think that rapid fat loss is always ill-advised or unsustainable as long as you know how to come out of it. Because what usually people run into problems with all these diets, just like a ketogenic diet, is if, like I was saying with the cyclical approach, if you know that you are going to have a starch refeed, and a starch refeed looks like a lot of white rice and a very lean protein. So perhaps you go to a all you can eat sushi restaurant and you get, really lean tuna and you eat all of that and that's your refeed versus someone who doesn't really know they're going to do a refeed, gets really hungry, and finds themselves somewhere and they eat a whole pizza and they eat a pint of ice cream and then they just start raiding the fridge and go crazy. I think going in and out of these fat loss phases also needs to be sort of understood how you're doing it. And so if you really lean into what I think, if a traditional juice fast is this more detoxing, lower calorie approach with green juices. Maybe we want to call this a sugary juice fast. And this is something that I seem to be kind of like more leaning towards. I've found that I feel amazing. I don't feel hungry, and my body temperature is actually nice and high. If I drink, the orange juice I get comes in 64-ounce bottles, and the apple juice that I get comes in 59-ounce bottles, and the pomegranate juice that I get comes in 48-ounce bottles. If I drink one of those a day, of one of those each, I think I settle around like 25, 2,600 calories just from that. And I eat a little bit of extra fruit. And when I do that, my fat loss is the rate of fat loss is much faster. Um, and so I think someone who really, really, really wants the fat loss above else, I think leaning into a sugary juice cleanse with scheduled, punctuated refeeds of mostly starch with some protein, like like 2 or 3 days rolling juice fast. That might be a really good way of getting the faster rate of fat loss with punctuating the starch. And I can't say I know exactly what metabolically the starch is doing, um, but I made a video about this. There's something that is definitely intriguing to me because in the cyclical ketogenic diet, they don't tell you to refeed with sugar. They tell you to refeed with starch. They want you to fill the muscle glycogen. In the raw till 4 thing, already telling you to make sure you include this starch, not just the sugar. So there seems to be something unique to the starch component because when I go just fruit, I still crave starch. No matter how much sugar I eat, I will still crave some amount of starch. I think that getting both in is going to be really important for sustainability. But if you schedule it such that you do 2, 3, maybe for very overweight, up to 7 days of the sugary juice fast with a starch refeed that's specific, that's targeted, that is then made sure to not include all other kinds of junk food. That balance, um, the cyclical nature, I think, is where we're going to see the most results in anything, as opposed to, like I was saying before, just a moderate approach like the swamp diet. let's hit the extremes and let's cycle through the extremes on a regular basis such that we can kind of fully give our body what um, the feedback signal is from such extreme, get the benefits and then kind of get into the next thing, all thinking of these as cyclical tools to use.
I I do agree actually, because it's not being discussed much, and I've read all the topics around metabolic swamp, but I think it's not being it cannot be um, argued against basically. So the metabolic swamp is for me a fact. So you need to work on the extremes now. How extreme? That's another topic, but I think yeah, we need to work. Even extreme may sound a bit a negative word, but it's not really. I think in that case, it's where we operate mostly, which means we cannot operate with both high carb and high fat at the same time. Um, and here comes the another question someone had for you, which is, can we add a bit of coconut oil or MCT um, during our day, let's say, of fruits?
So I know the reason why they're asking this, and it's because um, the the FGF21 kind of model of that's what's driving fat loss comes from the liver seeing an excess of calories compared to the rest of the body. Of course, within the context of protein restriction. And so fructose goes to the liver, and that's basically the liver carbohydrate. And alternatively, the liver fat is MCT oil.
Mhm.
So MCT oil goes is metabolized by the liver, just like kind of like fructose is. And so anabology has kind of had this theory that you can, because part of how you can trigger FGF21 is not just the restriction of protein, but an overabundance of sugar. And so it seems that perhaps could do the same with adding coconut oil, or more specifically, pure MCT oil. I think it's possible. Um, a lot of people. I mean, Ray Peat himself reported that when he kept like a spoonful of coconut oil in his diet every day, that his waist would shrink. Um, I, you know, there's no, again, it's like, try it, like I haven't done that. I have found myself that, um, there are times when I can take coconut oil and it can really make me feel hot. And I think that's something to pay attention to. One of my friends on Twitter, his name is Thermobolic. He has talked a lot about the inclusion of coconut oil to a substantial degree, even like multiple tablespoons a day seems to always increase his metabolic rate and help him lose fat with a greater caloric intake. Personally, I just find coconut oil to be unappetizing. And so in the context of eating it like by the spoonful, it just doesn't sound appealing to me. I have cooked food in it. Like I like to cook shrimp in coconut oil. But what I would tell this person is to try it and pay attention to how you feel and see if it works for the fat loss. I don't think it's going to be one of those things that is like detrimental by any means. Um, but I think it's certainly possible that it could help with fat loss, or it could just be one of those things that, if it's basically acting just like fructose, it's not going to help any more than fructose, but it can work all the same. Yeah, give it a go. And again, just always pay attention to how it makes you feel. Like if something makes you feel hot, but like not like in an uncomfortable way, but in a good way, that's probably a good sign.
I think it's yeah, I think the advice was spot on. Just for me to add that I mean, one is first of all also anabology, and there are a couple more studies that are being referred the last few weeks. Is that we can have the same increase in FGF21 also with a high fat diet. And in the study I've seen, if I remember it correctly, it's not because, or it's not it was not an MCT or coconut oil fat source, but overall a general fat source. So it was also stearic acid, etc. So I think both, and that's why probably keto works, and that's probably why also Jay Feldman says that also both sugar and keto or stress driven because they both increase FGF21. That's another little topic, but also just to highlight that, I mean, if we are afraid of one spoon, let's say you, for whatever reason, you want to have your, I don't know if you, how you put a little of teaspoon in your fruit juice and have put a bit of MCT, we should not, I think it's inconsequential, right? So it's probably, yeah, try it out, but don't expect that your fat loss will stop because of that little teaspoon, right? Uh,
Yeah, I mean, people who do the potato diet, I thought in my mind, I thought that the diet was you just eat nothing but potatoes and it has to just be pure potato. But what you find is that a lot of the people, like, they still cook their potatoes in butter or coconut oil. They still include a fat, but it's still enough. It still works kind of all the same. Um, and I think there is, again, I think there's something very uniquely related here about the protein restriction.
mm,
That it seems like you may be able to, again, I think it depends on what any individual's metabolic issue is that's preventing them from losing weight. So for some people, they might be able to eat all the fat and carbs they want together, and if they remove protein, they're going to get all the results, right? If they keep protein very, very low, like less than 5%, less than 2%. Um, and on other people, they might be able to eat all the protein they want, but they can't mix carbs and fat. I very much think that what is preventing each individual person from losing weight is so unique that of course, large swaths of people can have the same problem. But I think it's just like all of these different approaches are something to consider and to try. Um, and what is causing it for one person, might not work for the other person. But again, I think we're just trying to accumulate enough different tools that then people can try, but it requires the individual to be willing to try something and have it not work and try something else. And, I mean, I joked about it. If anyone who can get X fat loss lean will win the Nobel Prize. It's like these people who are hyper resistant to fat loss. There's got to be something that's in play. And, so I'll give an example of something that I found very interesting. So, my father died last year. He was 90 years old. And in the last so many months of his life, he had fallen and broken his hip, and so he was, in the hospital for a while, and then on hospice. Um, and what was fascinating was, my dad was never like an obese person, but as he got older, he kind of just had like, sarcopenia and excess fat, and it's just pretty standard for someone who was, reaching 90 years old. And so he kind of had this, this belly, whatnot. Nothing crazy, but just, no one would call him skinny or anything like that. And I noticed that, as he was basically, on his way to dying, he got extremely lean first. Right now, I'm not saying that that's good and that's healthy, but it's fascinating that the body can find a way to actually lose all of that fat that some people feel like can never go away. Now, one of the arguments against ketogenic diets is that this whole like stress cascade of hormones is in many ways replicating the kind of a death in a way. Like all of these processes are so catabolic that they're on the path to death. And I'm sorry for bringing up something kind of, morbid for people, but for me, just like, I found it very fascinating um, how lean my dad got on his way out. And of course, it's not something that anyone would want to replicate or anything like that. But in many ways, on like kind of again, I'm sorry if it's a little bit too morbid, but in this kind of like weird bright side, like I don't think any level of fat is like beyond um, losing. I think there's always something that the metabolism can do if we can figure out what the answers are that can get someone to actually lose the fat. And of course, the question becomes, how do we do this healthily? Because if we want to replicate starvation, People called keto a fasting mimicking diet, and perhaps one that is abundant in fat and is not severely deficient in energy, still has lots of calories. Sorry, might not really have, as detrimental effects. So, okay, we know if you mostly starve someone, they can lose weight, right? We've seen what happens in concentration camps. We've seen what happened with the Minnesota starvation experiment. We've seen that, okay, they can lose the weight and then there's this metabolic rebound. But if we know that the weight can be lost, we can at least try to figure out how we can do it without the negative health effects, without the compensatory rebound weight gain that comes after it. And, I mean, I understand like, for instance, you couldn't do the starvation experiment today. The ethics, we don't allow that stuff to happen anymore. And I'm not saying oh, we need people we can do that with, but I feel like there's still so much to explore with weight loss specifically. Because I mean, I can tell you that, like I said, even when I was eating what you might consider to be a very healthy diet that had a large variety of nutrients, I felt much worse and I was overweight or relatively overweight compared to times when I was lean and eating uh, an objectively more unhealthier diet. Right now, maybe you could say I was younger and you're more resilient to it, but that's fine. Okay, so then what we're saying is it's not about what you eat. We're saying it's about the state of the organism. And if you can get people to have all these youthful hormones, can have a high metabolic rate, then it seems like the all the excess obsession with every last new ingredient that's in our food. And again, I'm a large proponent for I want all the junk out of our food. I want the ingredients in our food to be better. But what I want more than anything is to be healthy. I want people to be healthy and to feel good. And the question then becomes like, what is the actual, how do we actually get that? Right? There's instead of all the other stuff that we do on our way to get there, how do we actually achieve the health, the energy of a lean, active physique and get people better in every way?
What's your take on that then? So what is the strongest lever? So I'll give you maybe three options. So we have metabolic rate, we have outside the swampland, we have protein restriction.
Well, I mean, well, my first question would be, how are you exactly differentiating these? Because if from the peat perspective, and I think in many ways, my mind, it's the highest metabolic rate is in many ways kind of like the closest we can get to the ideal
Mhm.
form. Um, how do you get the highest metabolic rate?
Okay.
Is it perhaps okay? It seems like protein restriction is a really big part of that.
Mhm.
It seems like an abundance of calories still is a big part of that, and maybe carbohydrates more so than fat, but maybe you can do it with both. Um, I think, and I just keep coming back to this. What I keep telling people, um, it's important that you still feel warm and that you feel good and that you sleep well. And this idea that to get lean, you have to feel cold and you have to feel hungry and you have to kind of be laying in bed all stressed out. Like, I don't think that that's a path towards good health. It just doesn't seem like that's the route for me. Um, so I would prioritize metabolic rate above all. And then again, just like fat loss isn't hard, it's can you do it sustainably and can do it that you feel good. Metabolic rate, now, okay, maybe that's harder to do, but then the question becomes, can you do it sustainably? Can you do it such that, because if you increase your metabolic rate, you can outpace your actual nutrient stores, right? You can outpace your body's ability to sustain the metabolic rate. So then if you say that prioritizing the metabolic rate also means sustaining that, then that sounds like for me the clearest top of the hierarchy.
Mm.
Um, and that's why I think so many people see such improvements in across their health from just supplementing thyroid alone. Um, and I'm not against supplementing thyroid. I'm not, one, the idea this is artificial or fake. I mean, humans have been including organs in their food, and thyroid has been a part of food for as long as we know. It's been in soups, it's been in ground meat, it's been in everything. Um, But again, I keep coming back to the fact that I have gotten better results in my sense of well-being, in my body temperature, in my sleep more than anything from the sugar diet than I have with any any other supplement, any thyroid, any try to my attempt to do a well-constructed balanced diet. Something about sugar diet seemed to just shoot past everything for me. And that's why my interest is so high in it. And I've talked about this in on my own channel, but I've always struggled with sleep my whole life. It was just something that, like, every night I just knew there was going to be another miserable laying there. And it was really just becoming a thing where it was like ruining my life. Where, there'd be times when it was not as bad. And if I didn't have a job and I could sleep in every day, then it became more manageable, but it became something that could potentially like ruin weeks of my life at a time. Like one ruined night of sleep, but just that whole week I would feel miserable. And then if you get another one, you're catching up forever.
Yeah.
Something about this, and I was not getting this with a lot of sugar, but also a more well-balanced diet. I was not getting this with a lot of sugar and a lot of protein, especially protein through the day. What I have gotten through specifically the absence of anything else during the daytime. I can eat a variety of dinners, but as long as I get an abundance of sugar during the day, my sleep is almost always so much better that it can't even compare. I used to consider it an achievement to fall asleep before midnight on any given night. And, the amount of nights that I've fallen asleep between 9 and 11 p.m. over the last few months, I would think it surpasses my entire life before that, maybe except for when I was a small child.
If we kind of start thinking how we break down our daily plan, probably if you eat too much protein, independent of all the FGF 21, etc. topics, then you actually will struggle because of the satiety alone it brings to actually increase your metabolic rate. So you cannot eat. I think it's at least people I see, I work with, and myself, I think it's impossible to eat. I mean, depending on your size, obviously, 3,000 calories of meat. And whereas probably, I mean, ex-fat loss can do it with cream. I think it's easier to do it potentially with juice. So it's how you can actually get there. So 3,000 calories or whatsoever. I think there is where protein restriction comes, and for many other reasons. And then how you construct it, maybe it's relevant. At least I have, so people who actually, I mean, a good sample size, let's say, is people who on keto who eat enough have good sleep. People who don't eat enough have problems with sleep and have many other problems as well. So I hear you, and I would say maybe just I mean there are many differences in the diets, and I mean we'll be here and discuss it a lot more. But maybe it's about the calories and how you can get there. And maybe for some, it's a lot easier to get their metabolic rate up by consuming simple um, sources of energy, which are easily digestible if you make the right choices. Because maybe not everyone has the stomach, let's say, to just eat 3,000 calories of cream and fat trimmings and what have you. That's
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's very possible that there's two ends of this that can work, maybe not just as well for the same person, but can work for different segments of the population. And perhaps there are people who, um, again, now maybe there's a factor of nature, maybe it's a factor of nurture, but you have segments of the population who their ideal path, or maybe not even ideal, but the most effective path that they're going to find is a very high fat keto approach. And you're going to see on the other side people who are going to do much better with a high sugar, high carb, low fat approach. Um, I think that I am. I think that, I was saying before, I think there's definitely a genetic component to it. I think, for instance, if you're someone who has an example like be high amylase production, that might be a sign that not only do you need high carbs, but you need high starch specifically. Um, and one thing I wonder is, I very much think that I'm kind of what they call like a high metabolizer for sugar. And what's funny is that I didn't have what I would consider a sweet tooth as a kid. Like I didn't love to eat candy, which is something that a lot of people have shared with me. It's like, oh, actually, my whole childhood I loved to eat candy, but I drank Coca-Cola like a madman as a kid. And I very much feel that I was attempting to self-medicate myself. And I wonder for how many people who have what we call ADHD, are those the people who are the high sugar metabolizers? And something else, I don't know if we have a name for it, some sort of pattern that might express itself, and that these are the people who do better with a keto approach. I very much wonder if there's some sort of pattern that we can look at that would help show which end of the spectrum people would thrive more on.
Hmm. Maybe it's where you live in the world, actually. So closer, so Africa, etc. Maybe they're more genetically predisposed for carbs. And people living in Germany or north, probably more easier for them fat. Not sure. What is your opinion on stress?
Yeah, I mean, again, like I'm open to the possibility that there is, whether it be certain segments of the population or any human body kind of has this high fat, keto-like path that can work just as well, if not better, than the high carb approach for some people. But I think if the fact that these stress hormones, and like you mentioned before, if someone is eating high fat, but they're eating enough calories versus not enough calories, does that change the equation? Um, I think it's very possible that if someone eats sufficient calories on a keto diet, that they might not have any of these problems. Perhaps maybe it's more likely they just might not have as much of the problems. If for no other reason than their body is still going to have to be creating glucose from somewhere. And I think what you're kind of doing is maybe creating something that is less than ideal, but might still be optimal for that person. Uh, like we're saying, maybe they have such severe insulin resistance, or their digestion is so screwed up that they would ferment any plant matter or any real carbohydrate foods such that it would cause more problems than it would solve. But for me, it's always like you can see with your eyes if you pay attention to everything what people who follow different diets look like. And I think there's certain arguments to be made about people with a certain um, kind of what in their appearance is, of course, tied to their physiology. They might be drawn to something in the first place. I think that's certainly possible. Um, but you see people kind of change the way they look depending on what diet they follow. And I noticed that a lot of keto carnivore people seem to look more aged, and I think that might be from more cortisol, adrenaline. A lot of keto carnivore people are really into coffee, and they might be relying more on stimulants to like at that point their own bodies, adrenals are kind of even tapped out, and it's like they need a further jolt. One thing I'll say is when I get an abundance of sugar in this way, and again, I did not feel this way until I removed protein from the biggest chunk of the day. So there's something even further here where it's not just the inclusion of sugar, but it seems like removing any possible impediment to the sugar being absorbed properly. I don't even think about caffeine at all. I don't like, I mean, I've never been someone who was like, addicted in the sense that I felt like I had to have it. I mean, I liked coffee, and there were various times in my life where I just stopped drinking it, so it was easy for me to drop. But I feel like all of my cravings for any other substance, so to speak, is like completely gone from sugar. And I think one of the things that anything that we might consider to be an addiction, might be a way to deal with and cope with increased stress. So if we have cortisol, we might look for um, alcohol, we might look for tobacco, smoke cigarettes to deal with it, to take the edge off. Then we might kind of have like a dip and we might look for coffee to bring ourselves up. Um, that's one of the things I kind of heard from Durian Rider, where he said that if you just get enough sugar, if you actually satisfy your sugar cravings, because most people think of sugar as being bad, and most people think of sugar as being really bad. So much to the extent that a lot of people think of sugar as bad, worse than they would these things that we actually do classify as drugs. There's like the classic thing um of like some girl like using like a hard drug and then being like, no, 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 I don't want that in my diet. Like, like they're gonna do cocaine somewhere, but they're like, where's that food from? Like, was that grass fed? Um, and maybe there's some credit to that, but yeah, I've noticed that just including sugar seems to satisfy a lot of other needs that my body feels like it things that my body feels like it needs. And so I think, because we know that uh, insulin opposes cortisol. That's one of the things I feel like I first learned when I was getting into nutrition, um, when I was like, in college. And, it was why I would kind of make a point to make sure that I had carbs in my breakfast when I was drinking coffee to avoid an increased cortisol spike, and I hadn't even gotten to Ray Peat yet at that point, but I very much seems like there's something specific about carbohydrates and maybe sugar, which lower stress. And this is one of the things that keeps coming back to me. It's like, and for people who follow a low carb diet or a ketogenic diet, the carb cravings seem to be this like really severe thing that they're like dealing with. You hear about people like, oh man, I never realized how much I had a problem with sugar until I stopped eating it. But it's always viewed through the lens that sugar is this like inherent bad, that carbs are bad, that, a glass of orange juice is the same thing as a soda, right? And then, of course, soda is objectively bad. And so if orange juice is being compared to soda, that makes orange juice objectively bad. I mean, I've told this story many times before, but like the most mind-blowing craving, almost like total breakdown I've ever had in my life was when I was carnivore and my carb craving, I was a few months in and my carb cravings were just insane, insatiable carb cravings to the point where I just like raided my fridge. I ate everything that had any carbohydrate in my fridge. I was eating yogurt. I raided my pantry. I ate a whole bag of almonds. I went to the store and I ate cookie dough and I got this thing and that. And I just like couldn't stop eating until I consumed like 8,000 plus calories. And it was like this, I just like blacked out and my body was, there was no bottom to my stomach. It was just like, I have to eat more. I can't stop. I can't stop. And I think that's like people looked at it and it's like, man, like carbs, sugar is really bad for you. It's like, is it really though? Like, is that what that's a sign of? Or is that not a sign that my body was desperately, desperately needing that? Where, you might say, okay, well, if you were just eating enough calories from fat on your carnivore diet, you wouldn't have had that experience. But it's like, at no point on the flip side have I ever been like, I have to just consume as much fat as humanly possible. I've never felt that on the reverse. And that's why if anything, and especially I brought up again how there are, uh, using a more naturalistic approach, there are plenty of low fat cultures, but there's not really any low carb cultures that perhaps for some people, based on their unique set of circumstances, a low carb keto approach might be the most, um, just might be what's going to work best for them. And I don't know if it's going to be the ideal scenario, but it just might be something that a lot of people either can use to get the results or they're not going to be able to adhere to something else, and that's going to be the thing that works the best. But
Mm.
I think that there's this if I kind of consider to kind of make sure I really answer your original question about the stress hormones and the cortisol specifically, if I think about what someone is driven to do above else. and above all else, and when I think about the way my body has responded to a lot of different things that I've thrown at it in regards to diet, it seems like at the end of the day, my greatest craving, no matter what I restrict on either end, is always for more carbohydrates. And maybe a little fat to go with it, but it's not like I would ever then go, I need to just drink heavy cream forever. Like that's going to satisfy my craving. But I could satisfy craving with pure carbs in the form of fruit and pure sugars, or I could satisfy it in terms of pure starch. But it's not like I need the fat to like quell this sort of total dysregulation. I think the combination of like the reason why ice cream is the way that it is in our culture, where it's like the movie where the girl breaks up, her boyfriend dumps her and she eats ice cream. Is she just eating ice cream because like no reason, or is because she eating it because it makes her feel good? She's not like sitting there going like, oh man, I really need to eat a steak to cope with this. Or, I need to drink heavy cream. But it's also like I don't want to eat like saltine crackers to cope with this either. It's like I want sugar and fat. And okay, like okay, there's a combination of both there, but if I had to say which one is it biased towards, it seems like it's the carbs and the fat is in second place, right? Like there seems to be something there.
Fair enough. But is there such a thing as a sugar addiction, Josh? So is there, so we're talking about the benefits, but is there a population that actually do have a problem with carbs, controlling carbs, or is it at the end, in your opinion, energy availability at the end?
Yeah, I think it we would only consider that if we came into this thinking that there was an inherent evil to carbs in the first place. No one says that you have an addiction to oxygen or water. The framing is such that that people think that it's like inherently bad. And if I were to think of myself as someone who has a sugar addiction, and again, because like I was in the CrossFit world for a decade, and a lot of people in that world are paleo-ish, keto-ish, kind of at least exposed to that stuff. And even though people might recognize that carbs are beneficial towards exercise performance, I would encounter a lot of people who are like, I'm gonna not eat sugar for 30 days. My beef jerky, which has 1 gram of sugar in it, I can't eat that anymore. I'm not gonna eat any fruit, and it's like there's this just weird idea that I think is a purely novel cultural thing that goes, sugar is this bad, drug-like, poison-like substance, where again, it's like if I, without even, again, not that I think there's anything wrong with like refined sugar, assuming that it's not all that you eat, that it's part of an otherwise nutrient-dense diet, but if I consume nothing but sugar in the form of fruit or fruit juice, I don't feel like I'm doing anything that's drug-like. I don't feel like I don't have any sort of oh my God, I have to have more and I have to have more. I have to have more. It's just a very normal, subdued, like, I mean, uh, this glass of orange juice is all I've consumed all day. Yeah, I mean, I think I had a couple sips before we started the podcast. And it's like, am I like freaking out, like rummaging through my room to get every last bit of carbohydrates that I can? It's like if I just give myself sugar and carbohydrates, I mean, my behavior is normal. I feel better. I'm not like, like I said, insatiably trying to stuff more in my face. It feels like it just makes me totally normal.
No.
And at some times that might make me feel really high energy. And other times that might make me feel relaxed. Like I feel very relaxed on this podcast. If you follow, he goes by Cows Eat Grass on
Okay.
Twitter and Instagram. He's a Ray Peat poster, His name is Cows Eat Grass, or he might call himself Cows Eat Grass blog because he has a blog, and he's written a number of books. I have some somewhere. Um, he's like one of the people who I feel like in the Ray Peat community online, of course, everyone was very pro sugar, that he was like really trying to tell people, no, 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 sugar, sugar's really good. Like not just sugar's fine. It's like you actually want a lot of sugar. And the more that I do this, the more that I think he was so right. And one of his tweets that I always remember is sugar can give you the energy to go to sleep. If you've ever, again, someone who's experienced various forms of insomnia, if you've ever dealt with that yourself and then fixed it, I mean, there's no truer, I cannot believe that those are the words that actually make it clear to me. But you need energy to relax. Um, and when I think about times that have been very sleep deprived, and I would kind of have this many times when I was younger, maybe in college, and I would be out drinking and partying. And you wake up in the morning after a night of very little sleep, and that sleep was not restorative whatsoever. You would feel like delirious, and it almost make you feel goofy and silly and energetic, and it would kind of be fun in a way, but you sort of feel like strung out versus when I have an abundance of sugar, I can feel so relaxed, just like unbelievably relaxed, and I can just fall asleep easily. So if there's ever a night where, especially like if my schedule is a little like a little out of control and I find that I don't get to have as much sugar as I would have otherwise had during the day, I can find myself at the end of the day almost needing to catch up on sugar. And so if there's any night that I've struggled to fall asleep, I'll just go to the fridge and grab some juice and drink a glass of juice, and then I can go right to sleep, it seems. And so there seems to be something there, and it just doesn't make sense to me to call that an addiction. If our body, like if we consider our lives like our existence and we need certain things to survive, like if that's the case, then we're addicted to everything. We're addicted to breathing. We're addicted to sleeping. We're addicted to fun. We're addicted to people. We're addicted to love. I mean, at one point, it's just like everything kind of it becomes all muddied. I don't think of it as addiction at all. I seem to just do much better with a lot of sugar. Like throughout this podcast, as I've gotten through more of the drink, I feel like I've been more relaxed. Like at first, I think I was rambling earlier because it was closer to me waking up and I was kind of getting a bunch of stuff done um and then like just kind of being able to sit down and relax. I feel like, oh no, I'm just like myself now. But I might just require a lot more energy input to perform at that higher level. And again, kind of going back to what we were talking about before, a lot of people in many circles, whether that be vegan or even a keto, think that, oh, you should only need to eat less. The less that you can eat, the better, you're more efficient. And maybe being efficient is not what is ideal if we're in an abundant situation. If we have an abundance, why lower yourself? Why not raise yourself to a higher performance, a higher form? And again, it's like I'm not vegan. I still eat meat. I'm kind of feeling that maybe I do better with fish and seafood than meat. But I was raised. My mom's Persian. She made a lot of lamb. I ate a lot of meat. So I love meat, but I can eat all this sugar during the day and then have regular dinner at night and still feel great. So I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to call it an addiction to me.
I agree. I agree. I mean, I never called it an addiction, actually. I never agreed with that. And I think this discussion hopefully will help people see it in a different light because it is about energy, I think, availability, about abundance. And in the keto space, also Amber, you should check a bit of her content as well, talks about it, how sleep, energy availability not only from a keto perspective, but energy availability is critical for sleep. So during sleep, we need energy, and people don't appreciate that. And I think all this is driven from a high metabolic rate. Yeah, I'm actually glad that we are discussing because I think there's a lot of things that we don't know, a lot of things that we need to learn. and maybe we start making some sense out of really get in touch with ourselves. How do we feel? Um, what's the importance of metabolic rate? And then I'm pretty sure something good will come out of all this discussion. And we don't need to be dogmatic. So I think that was a great chat. And yeah, I'm super happy. I really enjoyed it. I hope you too.
Yeah, thanks. No, it was fun being here, and it's nice to kind of go like across the aisle from the carbs to the keto thing, because what I think we're trying to do is we're just trying to figure out how the body works
Yeah.
and how to get people results. And so I'm not married to any specific thing, I'll follow wherever I feel better. And so I think the more that these kind of conversations happen, the more likelihood that we'll find better solutions for people.
Many thanks, Josh. We'll keep in touch.